If I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon, 240,000 miles away, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, and do all this and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
A mere 7 years after President Kennedy shocked, amazed, and motivated all of America with his moon goal, 3 astronauts, Frank Borman, William Anders, and James Lovell, actually visited the moon. These space pioneers did so on the shoulders of over 400,000 American workers who built and perfected space technology so that all of America, and the rest of the world for that matter, could vicariously spend Christmas 1968 at the moon.
Kennedy said it well when he decided that we were going to do it. He called it the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked. And it was all of that, you know. I mean, like, I don't think we realized at the time, you know, how absurd and ridiculous it was. I mean, it was a crazy goal. I mean, like, it was a lunatic thing to do. And I think all the people that were involved with doing it knew it was a lunatic thing to do.
At the time he made the speech, we couldn't do orbit determination from a short arc solution of radar from Bermuda. We hadn't flown John Glenn yet. Thought he was crazy. I thought he'd lost his mind. I've said that publicly a number of times.
It was an almost unimaginable challenge in terms of its scope and its difficulty, and I wondered how anybody could make such a bold decision at the time. I mean, it was a major piece of work in front of us. And the space theater, a new one to people, was begun to be seen as an area of competition between the major powers, that is the United States and Soviet Union. And in that context, I think there was a great deal of fear that the Soviet Union had a big head start on us.
The Soviet competition, I think, was a great motivation for the American space program. And although as a part of that program, I was not aware of the details of the Soviet program, and I didn't understand exactly where they were all the time. None of us did. We all knew they were very competent, they were very motivated, and that the resources of that country were totally dedicated to accomplishing the goal, which was to beat us to the moon.
So it was a very exciting, kind of rewarding, energetic, I mean, kind of electricity in the air kind of a time, all against the background of this threat from the Soviet Union, the sense of competition, the sense of never knowing where they were in their program and when they were going to spring a surprise on us that would leave us, in effect, behind in this competition that we're engaged in. I remember looking at film of launches, frankly, most of which seemed to end up in a disaster rather than a successful launch to space. So we had an environment where the technology base was beginning to be there, but was very tenuous.
NASA and all of America, however, were soon dealt a devastating blow in the space race to the moon. During a ground test in January 1967, the first Apollo capsule, Apollo 1, exploded in flames, killing its 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. NASA personnel gutted the remaining Apollo capsules and were alarmed to find more than 1,000 critical faults in wiring and hatch construction.
It was tragic. I was sitting there directing the test, and to have this happen, it took us totally the sense of shock. but our job was to recover. The astronauts had always said, "You're going to lose people. Don't stop. Keep moving, because it's what we want." And that's what we did.
You know, after Apollo 1, they lost 3 people in Apollo 1. They still fixed it, and they were flying to the moon a year and a half later. You know, to where like they didn't stop in those days. You know, I mean, they had a problem. They said, "Okay, fix it. Get on with it."
So a redesign of the hatch to be an outward opening hatch and a total elimination of consumables inside that ship were the 2 big design changes that were made after the fire.
Borman was the guy that was in the middle of the Apollo fire investigation. He was the guy that drove the whole thing. He was the guy that booted North America in the butt when they needed to be booted. And he became the very highly respected astronaut, not only by his peers, but by us. On top of that, Borman was probably the most trusted, most deserving, most accomplished astronaut of the group.
As a direct result of Frank Borman's involvement in the Apollo 1 fire investigation, he was chosen to command the first manned mission using the huge and complex Saturn V rocket, a mission that was originally designed to test all of the systems in Earth orbit. However, in the summer of 1968, very disturbing news came regarding the Soviet flight of an unmanned Zond space probe, which circled the moon. Western intelligence agencies identified this probe as potentially being refitted to include at least 2 cosmonauts. The Soviets soon followed this success with the manned Soyuz 3 mission to Earth orbit in October. Then, in November, another Zond probe made yet another round trip to the moon. The world watched and waited for an anticipated Soviet attempt to send a cosmonaut to the moon. Faced with the prospect of the Soviets reaching the moon with a manned mission first, and scoring a major propaganda coup in the process, NASA made the bold decision to send Apollo 8 into lunar orbit on Christmas Eve and beat the Russians to the moon at any cost.
Apollo 8 had its mission changed in August when NASA learned that the Soviets were planning a lunar flyby before the end of 1968. And so we were abruptly changed from a Earth orbital mission, which was simply a systems checkout mission. And after that mission had been changed, of course, we worked very, very diligently to get our adjustment ready and to get our training done so that we could fly the mission.
When we decided to do Apollo, or started to plan Apollo 8, we only allowed 3 or 4 guys in our whole organization to know what we were doing. Because we did not want the Russians to know what we were doing. I mean, we were all running, man. Zoom, 7 days a week, all our waking hours. And I'm hiring people. Shit, I'm hiring people like crazy. In my organization, everybody else is doing the same thing.
The original Apollo 8 crew was Bill Anders, Mike Collins, and myself. And then Mike had a bone spur in his neck, and he had to have it operated on. And so Jim Lovell moved up to take Mike's position.
The Apollo 8 commander, Frank Borman, was a veteran astronaut who had previously spent 14 days as commander of Gemini 7 with James Lovell. Lovell, named Apollo 8 pilot, had not only flown with Borman on Gemini 7, but also flew on board Gemini 12. The only rookie on board was co-pilot William Anders.
We were in training in the initial parts of training, but Jim was in the backup crew, and he was familiar with the Apollo, so it really wasn't that big a deal. Mike was pretty upset about it, but it wasn't. I mean, from a technical standpoint, we all could do the job.
I remember one of the questions I got asked by the press over and over again They'd always say, well, are these the best astronauts you've ever had flying? How do they compare with the guys that went before? And I would always answer that saying, they're the best we've ever flown, because they've learned from all of the mistakes of everybody else, they've learned from the experiences from everybody else, and therefore they are bound to be the best trained and the best astronauts we've ever flown. And I think that is a true statement. They had an amazing capability of learning from each other. And I thought that was fabulous.
In the process of training, we crashed many times into the moon. Other times we'd get very nervous about what was happening with the guidance system, and we'd abort unnecessarily to the point where we really started losing confidence in our own ability as controllers and our ability as a team. The crew on some occasions would want to go off and train by themselves. We'd want to go off and train by themselves. So for about a month period, right in the middle of the training, it got really dicey down here.
Everybody goofed the first time he did it. And he started giving us all this bullshit about, well, I didn't know this was going to happen, so I did this. And I said, whoa, I stopped the whole goddamn thing. And I went in, got him offline. I said, look, I don't want any bullshit from you anymore. If you make a mistake, you say you made a mistake. If you didn't, that's fine. You listen to what we're saying, we're going to listen to what you're saying after this thing is over. You tell us what you did right, and you tell us what you did wrong, and you tell us what you didn't like about what we did, and we're going to tell you what we didn't like about what you did.
Chris was very tough on us when we screwed something up, and yet it was always done in a way where it was fatherly, in the sense that he was trying to get us to grow up and learn something from whatever it is we hadn't quite done right in a simulation or whatever. And it was a very tough set of standards. I mean, if people didn't make it, they didn't play. They weren't in the control center.
And then I think we did our homework, we came back together, we convinced ourselves individually that we could do it, and collectively that we could do it. And all of a sudden, about 1 month prior to the time that we went for it, things started coming together. The team started sounding good. We started winning more of the training cases. We'd start beating our instructors at this process of training.
These people really had to work like crazy. You know, around the clock, day after day. It was very destructive to family relationships. You know, I mean, it was hard on parent-child relationships. I mean, like, I know some astronaut kids that, you know, really didn't see much of their dads back in those days. So, yeah, I mean, like, it was hard on marriages. It was hard on family.
But I did make a point of meeting with the crew chief, crew leader, Frank Borman, once or twice while we were preparing the bird, to make sure there was nothing he was worried about. The way we conducted the business, the tests were all in the open. We'd have briefings after the tests where the crew was involved to make sure there was everything was understood, everything that had gone wrong was going to be corrected. So in that way we developed, you might say, a confidence which we knew we were doing what we had to do, and the crew was satisfied that it was being done.
I think all of the people in the program were aware that there was a danger involved, but I think we also, you know, had spent so much time in the factories and had so much confidence in the people that were involved in the program that I honestly felt that the odds were very good that the flights would be successful. And so I really I think the thing that probably I felt was the most dangerous of all was the launch, because of the uncertainties of rockets.
The huge Saturn V rocket was over 350 feet tall and 33 feet in diameter at its base, with over 3.5 million parts. It was by far the greatest piece of man-made machinery ever built in human history. The Saturn V was the only rocket powerful enough to make it to the moon.
Well, I must confess that when I first saw the Saturn V in a sort of a mock-up, I wondered, is this thing going to fly? But I must confess that saying we're going to harness this thing, it's going to do what we want it to do, we knew we had our job cut out for us. We were using liquid hydrogen as a propellant along with liquid oxygen, and liquid hydrogen is just much harder to handle than liquid oxygen. It's, of course, it'll burn, it'll explode on you, you don't turn your back on it.
The rocket itself was almost like 40 stories tall, you know, and that's more than the Statue of Liberty. I think it's on a par with the Washington Monument, I'm not sure, and every inch of it is full of exploding fuel. You know, I mean, it's equivalent to sitting on top of an H-bomb or an A-bomb, I mean, or enough of a bomb to where you don't care what kind of bomb it is. I mean, you're gone if it doesn't work right.
It would take normally 3 months to check out a spacecraft. From the time it arrived in Florida until we were ready to launch, it was about a 3-month interval. And in that period of time, our procedure called for us to check every switch, every wire, every component. We had to make certain it would work when it was supposed to work, make certain there was no crosstalk between wires, and that is what gave us the confidence to finally say, yes, it's ready to fly.
I really did not believe that NASA would find so few problems in the systems that we would be able to launch. That was my overriding concern, because you know they were going to be extremely picky about looking at all the systems. They all worked.
Every part in it was built by the low bidder, you know, so I mean, when you're sitting on top of the thing, I mean, like you know better than anybody else how complicated it is, how many moving parts there are in it, you know, I mean, the wiring in the thing could wire a small city, you know, to where it's a very complicated, very powerful machine. And those guys knew it better than we could, you know, I mean, and there was nothing they could do about it.
The consoles in the launch control room were tied to a specific part of the booster, the spacecraft, and each one was monitoring a part. There was about 350 people on consoles who were monitoring the activities. And if anyone saw something he didn't like, that was his responsibility, he called no go. So you went down that way, and that's what gave you the confidence that this whole thing is moving right, because there's no way one person could keep all those things in his mind. But each one, going through a set of checks, going through a set of procedures, would look at the pressures, look at the amounts of oxygen flowing or the amounts of hydrogen flowing, look at the battery voltage levels, look at certain valves which you have to open and close. And that's what gave you the confidence that the whole bird, the entire activity was going correctly.
You can call it naivete or what, I just never doubted that we were going to make it to the moon. The only question that I had was whether they were going to get there ahead of the Russians. And that was to me, that was the $64 question.
The actual launch is the portion of the flight where they have the least control. I mean, they're basically just passengers. I mean, to where like, here are these guys that have spent all their lives learning how to fly, learning to be pilots, be at the controls. And during launch, there's really very little they can do except for just strap in and ride it, you know? So it was very nervous making for them. I mean, like the heart rates that they monitored in mission control, I mean, like almost invariably showed higher heart rates during launch than at any other portion of the flight.
Your thoughts were on the job at hand. You weren't thinking broader things, you weren't thinking who's looking or anything of that nature. That's superfluous. You think of the job at hand, the counting down of the procedures, the counting down of the steps of the test, the things that are going on, the results that have got to come out, and that's the way you get through it. You could be concerned that something would go wrong. But if something went wrong, you were prepared to take other steps. fear as such was overcome by procedures, by knowing what you had to do, knowing that if there was something wrong, you could take alternate steps, and always with the idea in mind that you wanted to keep that crew safe.
All the second stage tanks now pressurized. 35 seconds and counting.
Go.
T-minus 20 seconds and counting. Guidance internal. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2, launch commit. Go.
Got a pitch and a roll program, and this baby is really going.
Roger that. Stand by for mode 1 Bravo. 1 Bravo.
On the way up on the booster, that's when the old lead weight started to go down to the bottom of my stomach, and I realized that perhaps there was something serious here.
Apollo Houston, you're right smack dab on the trajectory. Your IU's doing a beautiful job.
Yeah, we hear you loud and clear, Apollo 8.
Okay, the first stage was very smooth, and this one is smoother.
Apollo 8 Houston, your trajectory and guidance are go, over.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, you're looking real good, Mike.
The staging on any of the vehicles that I flew, either of the vehicles that I flew, was very traumatic. You're thrown against the straps and then thrown back again. It was a pretty traumatic event on the Saturn. Of course, when the first stage shuts off, you get the lack of acceleration, and then the bang as the pyrotechnics separate the stages, and then the thrust again as the second stage kicks in.
Now, during the course of the mission, the flight director is the quarterback of the team. He's the guy calling the signals. So the flight director has a basic rule. In this mission rules, the strategy book we call, there's one basic rule that talks about the flight director, and it says the flight director may take any action he believes necessary for crew safety and mission success. That is the principal rule that dictates the flight director's responsibility.
Apollo Control Houston, 2 hours 25 minutes ground elapsed time. It will be during this pass that we will have the translunar injection burn.
Capcom, we're go for TLI.
Roger. Guys, I've got the word you wanted to hear. You are go for TLI. You're go for the moon.
Confirms ignition. And the thrust is okay, booster says. And Borman says we've got SECO.
cutoff was right on the second.
There were a lot of naysayers. As I recall, we were told that going through the Van Allen belt will be fried. I think even Dr. Van Allen suggested that the radiation there would be very, very... So we wore dosimeters, and I don't think they even blipped. There just were a lot of people that were supposed experts in their field that cast all kinds of doubt about not just Apollo 8, but the lunar landing and everything else.
Going to the moon wasn't the important part. That's just the first place you can stop. What really matters about Apollo is those were the first people to leave the Earth, to go anywhere. You know, in the next 500 years, if we don't destroy ourselves, who knows where we'll go? You know, I mean, there's a whole universe out there waiting for us. But that was the first time human beings left the Earth.
Give us clues to what it looks like from way up there.
Roger. I can see the entire Earth now out of the center window. I can see Florida, Cuba, Central America, the whole northern half of Central America, in fact all the way down through Argentina and down through Chile.
You picked a good day for it.
They weren't looking at the moon on the way out there. They were looking back over their shoulder at home as it got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And if you go around and you talk to them all, they'll talk to you about the Earth more than the moon, more than anything else. I mean, they'll talk poetry about what the Earth looks like as you're getting 10,000 miles and 20,000 miles and 50,000 miles and 100,000 miles and everything you have ever known. You know, I mean, like the whole history of the human race is getting to the point where you can cover it up with your thumb. And that's a very powerful psychological force.
This transmission is coming to you approximately halfway between the moon and the Earth. We've been 31 hours, about 20 minutes into flight. We have about less than 40 hours left to go to the moon.
The Earth became a personality and a character and a living thing for all of these men instead of just this abstract place where we all live. And that was great, you know. I mean, I think that, to me, validates the adventure or the journey.
Alright, you're all looking at yourselves as seen from 180,000 miles out in space.
Mike, what I keep imagining is if I'm some lonely traveler from another planet, what I think about the Earth from this altitude, whether I think it'd be inhabited or not.
Don't see anybody waving, is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm just kind of curious whether I would land on the blue or the brown part of the Earth.
You better hope we land in the blue part.
Going to the moon, we hardly saw the moon. I don't believe we ever saw the moon. We fired the service module engine in complete darkness, and at the instant, one of the overriding parameters that would tell you whether you were on course or not was to look down and see the lunar sunrise. And at the instant we were supposed to see it, there it was. You know, I sound like a man be painted, but I have enormous respect for the people that did that. As I understand, the people that programmed that trajectory the average age was 29 years old.
I was the fourth flight director that was named, and I was 27 at the time, and all my colleagues in the control center were a year or two less than that. I mean, most of them were 25 at the time, right out of college. There were a number of key leaders for us who provided the officer corps, if you will, and the rest of us were the grunts and loved it. I mean, we loved our officer corps, or we loved the work that we were doing, and we just threw ourselves into it. We could not imagine not being successful.
And that was what's so wonderful about Apollo 8. We were able, through an empirical process, to fly the exact orbit on Apollo 8, draw a straight line through the points of orbit prediction, and man, we could nail exactly where we wanted to be.
Jim, they've just been looking at your marks with respect to accuracy, and they figure they're within a couple thousandths of a degree of the theoretical optimum. We've got it. Apollo 8 now in lunar orbit. There's a cheer in this room. This is Apollo Control Houston, switching now to the voice of Jim Lovell.
By
by 60.5. Good to hear your voice.
Okay, Houston. The moon is essentially gray. No color. Looks like plaster of Paris. Or sort of a grayish beach sand. We can see quite a bit of detail. The craters are all rounded off. There's quite a few of them. Some of them are newer. Many of them look like, especially the round ones, look like hit by meteorites or projectiles of some sort. Langrenus is quite a huge crater. It's got a central cone to it. The walls of the crater are terraced, about 6 or 7 different terraces on the way down. Bill, how would you describe the color of the moon from here?
The color of the moon looks a very whitish gray, like dirty beach sand, and with lots of footprints in it.
Don't these new craters look like pickaxes striking concrete, leaving a lot of fine haze dust?
I think that it did expand our awareness and understanding of who we are and our role in the universe. I mean, like, what does this beautiful blue-green globe have to do with all the rest of it?
When you're there and thinking back, particularly going around the moon, looking back at the Earth, and everything that you hold dear is back on Earth, it's a nostalgic moment. There's just no question about it.
It was a spiritual journey. You know, I mean, like, that's supposed to be true of every big journey of our life. It's supposed to be a spiritual journey, or there's supposed to be a spiritual component of the physical journey. And it was equally true for those men. It was true of that journey, the biggest journey humans have ever taken, also had a powerful spiritual component.
There was a sense that we were a long way from people that we really loved and cared about, and I suspect it would have been that way in any event, but I know that for me the feeling was magnified because it was around Christmas.
On the eve of Christmas, as the eyes of the world followed Apollo 8 across the moonscape, the astronauts invoked another, older voice, reading in turn the first 10 verses of Genesis, the story of creation.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day.
God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
It's the sort of situation where your mind is naturally going to go off in spiritual directions. I mean, and if you're a spiritual Christian, you know, I mean, they're going to go off in Christian directions. You know, if you'd have put a Hindu or a Buddhist or a devout Muslim up there, you know, I mean, like, they would have been inclined to spiritual thoughts too, I would think.
Give us, O God, the vision which can see thy love in the world in spite of human failure. Give us the faith to trust the goodness in spite of our ignorance and weakness. Give us the knowledge that we may continue to pray with understanding hearts.
and show us what each one of us can do to set forward the coming of the day of universal peace. Amen.
We flew around the moon 10 times, took pictures of the potential landing sites. The most impressive view from the moon wasn't the moon at all, but the Earth. The Earth was a remarkable view. And then we started home. The most tense part of the mission, I think, was relighting the service module engine to get us out of lunar orbit. If that hadn't happened, I'd still be circling the moon. There's nothing anybody could have done for us then, though. If it didn't work, it didn't work.
Okay, baby. 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, burn. Burn it? You're burning. 4 to go. You're burning. 100 to go. Okay. 78 to go. 50 to go. 20 to go. Stand by, Tom.
All systems are go. Apollo 8. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston. Apollo 8, Houston.
Apollo 8, over.
Oh, Apollo 8. Loud and clear.
Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus.
That's affirmative. You're the best ones to know.
It appears that we did a grave injustice to the food people. Santa Claus brought us a TV dinner each, which is delicious. Turkey and gravy, cranberry sauce, grape punch, outstanding.
Roger, Jim. Glad to hear it. You know, we're down here eating cold coffee and bologna sandwiches.
I think I must have the feeling that the travelers in the old sailing ships used to have. We've gone on a very long voyage away from home, and now we're headed back.
This whole concept of whole Earth, that's a cliche that we all throw around now, but I mean, that's where it came from. These were the first humans to actually see the whole Earth. They took the first photographs of the whole Earth. You know, I mean, like, they really did appreciate the whole Earth before any of the rest of us. And they brought that feeling back with them. And I think it is slowly communicated out to the rest of us. But that's the biggest lesson I think I learned from talking to them, is how important leaving the Earth was to them, and then of course coming back to it.
Well, Ken, that just leaves you or I. How about you and I? Anything exciting happen today?
Real quiet down here. Everybody's smiling. Everything's pretty calm, like it should be on Christmas.
Very good.
It also we're in a period of relaxed vigilance.
Very good. We'll relax, you be vigilant.
The ground called up and said, we've been tracking you on radar and you guys are really hauling the mail. Well, you know, to make a re-entry here on the Earth, you have to come into a 2-degree pie-shaped wedge. If you come in too shallow, you skip out like skipping a stone on water. If you come in too steep, you're a fiery meteor for a few brief seconds over the night sky. We were coming in, we hoped, into that pie-shaped wedge.
This was the first re-entry from 25,000 miles an hour or a hypervelocity re-entry. We didn't have retro rockets to slow us up. We depended upon the atmospheric drag. And that was an area that I was, as the mission commander, was really more involved in than any other part of it. And that was the area that I thought could have been the showstopper.
You hit the atmosphere at a pretty good speed. I mean, like, you know, essentially escape velocity coming back too. So I mean, it's 26, 28,000 miles an hour, somewhere in there. And when you hit at that speed, it's just like a meteor, and you ionize the gases around you to where you're cut off from radio communication. And normally it's about 3 minutes. I mean, and they will know as you're coming in, based on your trajectory, exactly how long it should be.
Ken Mattingly just put in a call and just frankly labeled it a radio check. He's gotten no responses yet. Ken Mattingly puts in another call. And there's Jim Lovell.
We're in real good shape, Houston.
Still fine.
I don't think that I would be here today if that maneuver wasn't successful. It was, and of course, the landing was successful.
I was in the Mission Control Center in Houston. I had flown from Florida to Houston for that, and it was like a dream come true. You saw the ship come in, you knew you could catch it long range, and you saw the chutes open up, and you saw it touch down in the ocean, and it was just a dream come true. But it took a lot of hard work to do it. Personally, when you look at the amount involved and the complexity involved, I also believed that there was the good Lord helping us. It would be a miracle to think we could have done it without an assist from the good Lord.
My feeling regarding the NASA team is one of enormous respect. Respect for their technical competence, respect for their integrity, respect for their management skills, and respect for their dedication. This was a unique experience, and as long as I live, I'll always think that the most fortunate thing that ever happened to Frank Borman was be able to be a part of that team. I think it was a unique time in history. We had everything going for us, including the support of the American people.
If you look at a lot of the hype you see in TV and movies, they see us celebrating virtually every event in the mission. That is not the case. We celebrate only when the crew is safely in Apollo on board the deck of the carrier. So the key thing is this business that we're in is absolutely intolerant of carelessness, neglect, incapacity. There's a lot of surprises. There's a high risk. There's nothing conservative about the business that we're in. So basically, we hold back until we are absolutely sure that our job is done. Then we will sit back and we'll celebrate.
Now.
We brought the flags out in this room. And I think that sort of said, hey, thank God for America, and thank God for this country that has let us work in such a marvelous program.
We were considered a bunch of hotshots. We were considered arrogant. And I used to come back from Washington and tell my whole organization at the Johnson Space Center, I said, people in Washington think we're arrogant. I said, the day I come back from Washington and they don't think I'm arrogant, that's the day I'm leaving.
Well done, young man. Outstanding.
Then we passed around cigars in this thing here, and this is when we could smoke in the control center. People would do this, and we'd light up the cigars. And that was, hey, our thanks to the team. Then we met with the other crews and the program managers. We opened the doors to this room. And these hundreds of people would come into the room, all of whom had one little piece of this mission, but without whom we couldn't have done this mission. There was just a feeling of togetherness, bond, unity, accomplishment.
Apollo 8 was the most important flight of Apollo, by far, no comparison. Apollo 8 was a major leap forward of anything we had planned to do. And being able to do that in the time span that we did it, with the guts of the management, was totally the most significant step in Apollo.
Those of us on the flight team, I think, felt like we passed through the threshold of knowing we were going to get to the moon when we did Apollo 8. We were able to support a decision to go to the moon on the second manned flight, and I think it was the turning point. From then on, it was downhill for us. We had a lot of things to do, but it was downhill, and we knew we were going to make it.
As a direct result of the success of the Apollo 8 mission, the final preparations for an actual moon landing became possible, a feat that later became reality on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin of Apollo 11 set foot on the lunar surface.
Picking up some dust. Great shadow. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little.
30 seconds.
Forward, drift. Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We brought back a belief in American craftsmanship at this period of time because it was an American flag that was planted in the moon. It was American craftsmanship that got there. We brought back a sense of wonder and mystery. It was probably one of the expansionist periods for science and technology. Kids wanted to become astronauts. Everybody wanted to see them. They brought back this resurgence, this interest, this vitality that has always been American. Americans want to be first.
And when you stop to think about it, I still marvel at the fact that here was the first manned Saturn V, the first time to the moon, so many firsts in this thing, and everything worked. It's a tribute to the fact that this team that put this thing together were just enormously competent. And I can't tell you anything about the Apollo 8 mission. It was an anomaly. It just all worked.
Frank Borman stayed with NASA up through Apollo 11, then retired in 1970, and is currently on the board of directors of several aerospace and scientific corporations. William Anders also retired from NASA in 1970 and now runs the Anders Foundation, a philanthropic organization. James Lovell was later assigned as the commander of the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, where an explosion on the way to the moon caused an abort of the mission. Lovell currently writes and lectures on his space experiences and the future of humanity in space.
We don't want to go back to the moon until it's easy to go back to the moon. It was very risky, very difficult, very expensive to go to the moon the way we did in Apollo. And I think the next time we go, we want it to be not as risky, we want it to be not as costly, we want it to be, the risk to be very, very limited in terms of safety. We want to be able to stay there a long time to take advantage of the people we send, because I'm sure we'll send a bunch of scientists as well as astronauts there.
I don't see exploring space as ignoring earthly problems so much as it's a different way to grow. You know, we have to grow our way out of our problems, and that's a very serious way to grow.
I hope and believe that there should be someday a lunar colony, much as we have a scientific colony in Antarctica, because I think mankind's knowledge will be enhanced, and their understanding of our total environment will be enhanced. But from the romantic standpoint, you know, I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be grueling missions. I think being up there manning those stations will be hard work. And when I look at it, I don't look at romance at all. I just see something that needs to be done, and I think the next few years will be spent hopefully in this permanent space station, learning really how to use and adapt to the space environment. I then believe that we will, without question, someday put people on Mars.
And when that day comes, the mission's success will owe much to the several 100,000 plus workers laboring behind the scenes to make a Mars landing possible. Standing on the shoulders of those workers, these future space explorers will, once again, be pioneering the new space frontier and beyond, just as their predecessors did on Apollo 8.